My first question for James is, why the title? Why Nature, My Teacher?
Well, I'll stand. So Nature, My Teacher is a title that came from my Zen teacher. And you'll find a little essay in the book about that. I studied Zen in California with a great Japanese master called Taizan Maizumi Roshi. And after I had worked with him for 10 years and lived in the Zen Center in Los Angeles for 10 years while starting an environmental law group in LA, I was up in the mountains east of Los Angeles for a retreat, for what we call a sesshin, one of these intense 7-day retreats, 3:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, and 3:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. Very intense. And at the end of it, you feel quite blissful. And Martin came to pick me up, drove up the mountains, and he had never met Maizumi Roshi. So he said to Maizumi, Roshi, thank you for all the teachings you've given to James for all these years. They've been so important to him. And Maizumi said, I am not James's teacher. Nature is his teacher. So that stuck with me ever since. He never told me that. It came to me through Martin. And that then became my koan, for what's now many years. And so when I came to write this book, which I did on a sabbatical last year, that came up as the predominant quest, how to explore in writing and in a way I could try and share with friends, how nature has been and continues to be my teacher.
One part of you, James, is this really tough litigator who will just go and take on corporations, take on governments. I remember you saying one day in Britain, I suddenly feel at home here in London. I feel at home. I said, James, this is the day you sued the UK government. So
True.
That's part of you. Another part of you is that you're a Zen priest. Which part wrote this book?
Those parts and more.
Yeah.
And in a way, the book wrote itself. So what the book does is try to put in verbal form, in a communicable form, the obsessions I've had for the last 4 or 5 years. So they're about my own journey, about what we're doing to the planet, about how to study who we are in relationship with nature. So in a way, the book wrote itself. By the way, on that case, I do remember that day very well. It took more than a year for me to figure out the first case. It turned out to be a very important case. And so we filed the case. And then I stopped in John Donne's chapel in the Inns of Court on the way home and meditated. And I thought, this feels pretty good. And then I got home and told Martin, I feel really good. And he said, did you notice that you finally sued the UK government? And that's why you feel so good. You only feel at home in a place where you sue the government. And, as it turns out, go on to win. So we won that case in the Supreme Court. And we got the Supreme Court to give us its first environmental injunction in history. And that was a directive to the government of the UK to clean up the air, because the air was dirty. And many of the things you see happening now are a result of that. The case immediately went, by the way, we said, okay, let's take it to the heart of the German motor industry. So we filed cases immediately after we went from London to the European Court and then to Germany and filed cases in the home of BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes, Stuttgart, Düsseldorf, Munich, because they were pushing diesel engines, which is much of the source of the air pollution. And we knew they weren't going to stop. They were addicted to it. So we sued, won there too, and 25% reduction in sales of diesel vehicles in the next year. So this gives you a sense of the wonderful strategic games you can play. I think I was strayed from your question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, why? Well, no, I'm going to ask you another question.
Yeah.
That was about being a tough environmental litigator. I should have mentioned it because you went straight into that moment and said, of course you do love litigating. I also wanted to let you know that, by the way, I am the warm-up act with these questions. And so we'll have this question session for half an hour or so, and James is going to read from his book as well. That's the true highlight of this part. And then it's over to you for questions. So if you think of your own questions on any theme that comes out of this, there's a big space open for you at the end of that. Another question I got for you here is about this book.
Yeah.
It's got the actual contents list reads to me like a poem. The Book of Millions of Years, the Book of Compassion Arising, the Book of the Warming Earth, the Book of Anxiety, the Book of Unapologetic Rest. And there's 12 books, I think. And they're all in the essay form, so I think it's your first collection of essays in that way. There's a poem at the end of each section. There's a photograph at the end of each section. How come it's taken this form, this fairly sort of unique and accessible form?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I started writing these as prose poems, and then I realized after publishing 2 books of poems, who cares about poetry? So, so I said, what is more accessible? Essays are more accessible. So I then reformulated things into essays, and then all of the things that followed that enlightening conversation with Martin took the form of essays. But then the form of the book was very organic. So I mentioned following my own journey, following my obsessions, and trying to explore my own sense of how to discover myself, nature, and the place we are in human history at the moment with climate change and the anxiety we're all feeling. How to explore all of that. And I wrote a series of essays on many facets. So I would just sit down and write. And then one day in Mexico, on sabbatical, I lined up all the essays on a very big table. And they cohered into these 12 sections organically. So moving from the first one is Nature, My Teacher, going into the love of nature. And then it follows into people. It follows into the nature of memory, exploring memory. And it goes then into death, because if you think about these things, you go there too. And you think about the death of nature. So all of that's there. And then it goes very explicitly into anxiety, because I wanted to explore climate anxiety. And on my sabbatical, I experienced a lot of climate anxiety. I'd been the CEO of ClientEarth for many years, and I realized that what had happened is I'd bottled up my anxiety in order to hold the flag and be the CEO, be the tough litigator, and all of that. And then I stepped down from being CEO to president, and it was as if all of that bottled up anxiety, the cork came out and it poured out. Now, that was difficult, but it was also really cool, because what Zen does is gives you this place to examine anything that arises. So anything that comes into your consciousness, any experience, anything that can possibly occur, is then material for appreciation, for study, and adds to your own appreciation of your life. So that anxiety then became a source of study, although not an easy source. And I realized when I was sort of halfway through that the more I understood about anxiety by studying it in my own mind and body, the more I could try to help others with their climate anxiety. So it was an organic creation, this series of books. My favorite title really, is the book of Unapologetic Rest. And that comes because I had never been good at resting. And this was sabbatical. I said, I kept getting directives to rest. And we were in South Africa and went to a major exhibition of black painters. And one of the curators had a great piece on the wall, which is quoted partly in the book. And one of the phrases in there was that our art captures our unapologetic rest. And I thought, one of the loveliest phrases I've ever heard. So I then began to explore unapologetic rest, and I hope to get to do more of that this summer. Yeah.
It's from the Book of Self and Others, one of the early books, though this is page 50 already to help you, and it's a piece called Meadow.
Meadow. Pneumonia recovery walk on my own, till friends come. Soft-winged flower beetles in bindweed, speckled wood butterfly, tattered. In the meadow, a mother pushes her child in a stroller, bulldog trotting behind. The woman's smile suggests deep contentment, and I realize how lucky she is. I push through the meadow on an edge of understanding, aiming myself deeper. We're both having good days.
So, James, you've got a tattered butterfly, you're sick, you're seeing this trotting bulldog and this contented mother pushing her baby along, and you both feel it's a good, you come around to seeing it's a good day, and you then dive for something deeper. What's it mean? So what meaning did you find?
Well, I'm always trying to go deeper. Back to my Zen master, the last words he said to me before he died, and that separated us in this particular life, at least in physical form, his last words were, "Go deeper." So a number of times in the book, we study this idea of what going deeper means. And so that was a day, it was just an experience, but a normal one in which you're feeling tired, you're feeling, wondering what life is about, you're kind of struggling, and then you see this woman who is having a marvelous time, and you empathize and connect and don't feel apart at all from the meadow, from the butterflies, from the woman. And I was empowered in a way by my appreciation of her moment in her life to appreciate my own, and then I went on to some philosophical reflections. Yeah.
And more reflections will come in this one. It's from the Book of Questions. It's page 81, and it's on the side of things.
Mm-hmm. So, on the side of things. Seas are restless, though they seek no outcome. Storms threaten without intent to harm. Springtime comes gently, though it's unstoppable. What if we didn't project such dramas into things? What if we saw things straight, received them, perceived them, didn't color them with emotion? If the theater of our minds let things be the actors, what if we took the side of things? Would the world seem a friendly place or not? Would it shift back and forth? Would nature be our teacher?
Simple question for you now, James. How can we change ourselves so that nature can teach us?
You don't have to change yourselves at all. Nature is teaching you all the time. The question is how to open up to it. And what we tend to do, particularly in a city, is put barriers there. And that's quite reasonable. When I go through traffic in London, I wear earplugs. So you don't have to be open to the point of being ruptured by noise and pollution. But nature is teaching you all the time, right? So your body is nature. You are not separate in any possible way from nature. And all it takes is tuning in. So in Zen meditation, in many forms of meditation, you simply follow your breathing. And when you do that, you're plugging into a fundamental consciousness of the living world. So I don't think you need to change yourself at all. What happens is you do experience change, and you experience change in your self-perception. So that when you're in nature and you feel like you're among friends, and being among friends makes you happy. There's now a lot of science. One of the things I did was run a brain science institute, and there's a lot of research now that shows very clearly that you become happier and healthier by being in the natural world, because inevitably you do experience this.
So if we're in a city, then do we need to separate ourselves from the city? Do we need to retreat, or does talking to a plant do it?
Talking to a plant is very good. So on my street, I've been watering the trees. That's very helpful. It makes me connected. It makes me feel very connected with the trees on the street who are needing them at the moment when it's warm. I find all kinds of interesting insects, spiders, beetles, in the city. In New York, what I used to do sometimes when I lived there is there are a lot of buildings that, consciously or not, are made of rock where you can find fossils. So then you find the history of life there in the building. So if you're open to the idea that all of this is somehow nature, and of course cities are as much a part of nature as coral reefs. We've created them. Small organisms created coral reefs. Modest, or at least medium-sized mammals created cities. So again, you're not separate from it.
We're moving away from the city, I think, in the next one. This is a piece called Becoming Ocean from the book called The Book of Millions of Years. That gives you a sense of the scope of this particular chapter. It's looking into these eternal rounds. And James, if you could read Becoming Ocean.
Sure. So, Becoming Ocean. Walk beyond the human village. Let thoughts slow down and drop away. Let the adrenaline pulse of hectic messaging fall silent. Hear ocean. Depth of mind, sound, color. Let your mind sink into ocean. At bottom, we have a tacit understanding with ocean. What is it thinking, its body of billions of years, as it scrapes and caresses lands uninterrupted? Perfect concentration ocean gives land, no distractions, no tiring. Water fraying fabric of rock, its rhythms in tug with moon whose light silvers its surface. When a humpback sings a new song, other whales pick up the tune and pass it on throughout world's waters. What is lost as we acidify seas and bleach corals? Permian, greatest of all dyings, saw almost all life extinguished. World ocean still rolled on, caressing hide of continents. Life rebooted and has come down now to us.
Thank you. For me, James, that reads something like a meditation, but it's also a meditation in which you're asking big questions and then sort of looking for the answers. What can you remember what space the writing of that came from? What, were you with an ocean, or did you have to go into meditative space to encounter the ocean?
I do remember the day I wrote that, and with many of these, one remembers vividly where you were and what the feeling was. And I had been meditating, and I had been meditating on the ocean. So this is really, in a way, it's a transcription of the experiences that I was having.
Right. The next one takes us into a different place. It takes us into London, in fact. It takes us to Hackney. It's from the book of Warming Earth. You'll get a sense of where the journey of this book with the titles. This one is called Augury.
And you'll note, when I get to it, that it mentions the day I wrote it was the hottest day in history in London. Come on in, please. There's plenty of room. So this is called Augury. In Hackney Marshes, I practice augury. If gods exist, they communicate, and birds are messengers, since they're closer to heaven than we, said the ancients. Augury stretches back before Rome to Egypt and Chaldea. An augur sees signs in birds' flight patterns, their numbers, and which species show up. And eagles more auspicious than a sparrow. Romulus and Remus argued over putting Rome on the Palatine or Aventine Hill. Sitting down, they settled it with augury. Each took half the sky. Remus counted 6 vultures. Romulus won with 12 and donated his name to the city. It's the hottest day in English history today. I do an augury on our warming world. Take half the sky. Wait, no birds, nothing to interpret. Empty sky didn't happen when ancients did auguries. Empty sky doesn't feel auspicious. I actually, a footnote to that one, there's a wonderful eco-feminist who lives in Berkeley, California, called Joanna Macy, who's now 94 years old. And I hadn't seen her in years. And I had this book, and I went to see her, and we sat in her kitchen and had tea. I offered to make the tea, and she said, "I'll make the tea." So she made the tea, and then I offered her the book, and she opened to this one I've just read, Augury, and she never got beyond it. She read it out loud 4 times, and I thought, for me, that was a great blessing. So I'm happy to be able to share that. Yeah.
And in the previous book, in the previous piece you read, the oceans piece,
yeah.
You took it into the immensity of oceans. It went beyond time. It was actually beyond concerns. Here you're taking us back into history as well, Romulus and Remus, but then we're going into a huge open sky. And then into profound concerns.
Yeah.
The empty sky upsets you. So when do we need to be beyond concern, and when do we have to get concerned?
Well, this is very much, it's a great question, and it's very much like your question about being a Zen priest and being a litigator. So for me, the grounding How You Don't Go Nuts. And the next piece we're going to read has something to do with this too. How you don't go nuts with the anxiety and with everything else is you ground yourself in the immensity that is nature and everything nature takes you to. And then when the anger arises, when the pity arises, when the emotions arise that cause you to want to do something, that's then the samurai that comes out. The Zen priest takes out a sword and goes and cuts off a few heads. For me, it's the grounding and then the arising of specific intent, and you go out and you do stuff.
And you're right, the next piece does address that, so if you could go on to it. It's actually from the book of anxiety. It steams up this thing. You reach anxiety towards the close, and this is a piece called Mind Cleaning. And
anxiety is it's very honest about anxiety. If you have climate anxiety, buy the book. This one is called Mind Cleaning. Maladaptive thought forms have led to the environmental crisis we find ourselves in, with all their human sequelae. We need to change our minds. Getting rid of maladaptive thought forms is like waking from a dream. When you wake from the dream of dominance and separation, you want to take care of the natural world and the people who are a part of it. You want to take care of everyone, even the bad actors. Your anger directed at them drains you. What sustains you is turning the anger and anguish into positive action. Any positive action. When the flood follows you, when the fire chases you, there are no longer enemies. Now, what about the mental problems that the environmental crisis will bring, and are already bringing? Dealing with the mental and emotional confusion that global heating will bring is also like waking from a dream. The difference is that unless we engage in radical change, we will wake up to find that we are in a nightmare, and that nightmare will be the real world. If this is where we wind up, we will all have anxiety, and it will be part of every day. We will need to tend our minds, soften our hearts, accept our anxiety, and work with it. Then we will need to take care of each other, take care of everyone living together in the world we made. Having the motivation to take care of everyone, finding meaning in taking care of them, finding joy in what remains of the natural world, saving what remains of the natural world. That will be our job. We will be able to do this because a nightmare is not the end of our story. A nightmare is something we live through.
Do you ever encounter anxiety in nature?
That's a good question. You mean like a creature being anxious?
A creature being anxious, or a tree losing its leaves. Is that an anxious tree?
Trees lose their leaves. I've been looking at a lot of them recently. I don't know if they experience anxiety, and I haven't anthropomorphized them that way. I'm sure if I were to see an animal caught in a trap, it would be anxious. It's not a normal experience for me.
Does that mean then the human nature itself isn't an anxious thing? It's just what we put on it? Because you say we are nature, and our bodies are nature. Listen to that. So if there's no anxiety out in the natural world that way that we see, where does our own anxiety come from?
Well, you might think of two different types of anxiety. And much of the anxiety we experience is a pure mental exercise caused by the mind we've been given. So our mind is a natural thing. Everything about it is great. We have thoughts. The problem is we don't control the thoughts, study them, or use them very well often. And we'll get anxious, I do too, about all kinds of things. Did what I say to her offend her? Well, maybe I'm anxious about that. Am I going to have enough in my ISA when I retire? Wow, I can get really worried about this. These are all things, and 1,000 other ones we can all come up with. Will the train stop running before I get home tonight? You can get anxious about almost anything, and we often do. So those anxieties are often based on irrational fears. We create worlds that in our mind that don't make us very happy. And that's just what we do. So then what's great and what being in nature helps you with is putting those things in perspective. It really does help with that. The other anxiety, we've just been talking about climate anxiety, it really hit me while I was writing this book, is different from most kinds of anxiety. Climate anxiety is a rational response to a real external situation, which, okay, we're making, but it's a genuine thing happening, and the anxiety is a useful trigger in our minds, our emotions, and our bodies to propel us to do something about it.
Could you move on now to think about the book, from the book of things I need to remember?
Yeah.
This just comes at the very end. You'd almost forgotten it. Remember, the book of things I need to remember.
Yeah.
This is a piece called No Cloud.
Mm-hmm. So I thought by this time in the book, we started with all kinds of nice things, and then we go into all kinds of pretty serious things. And we do it in a way that I hope is enjoyable, but it's pretty serious. So by the end, we have, the last two chapters are, books are the Book of Unapologetic Rest. We've been through all of that. There's a way forward. And then finally, the Book of Things I Need to Remember has some that are meant to be pleasant and easy. One about Einstein's Belt, for example, which maybe we can read if you want. But No Cloud. No one finds their way without wandering. No democracy is secured by the checks and balances of its constitution alone. More true than ever I knew when I was writing this, right? No one knows what is beyond death. No cloud lasts forever. No flower opens without willing to be pollinated. Einstein's
Belt, since you brought it up, is at page 219.
Yeah, this is a short one. These tend to be quite short. Einstein's Belt. A man of my type, Einstein said, needs a belt to hold up his pants. When I read this in college, I cried, who else is a man of his type? It didn't occur to me that he wasn't talking physics. Now I'm the age when he talked trousers. I keep tightening my belt so my pants don't fall down.
Just to the one on the left, to-do list as well. Page 218.
Yeah, got it. To-do list. Go deeper into the nature of reality. Be more loving. Write better essays, and more of them. Be more strategic about protecting nature. Understand how AI will make millions jobless. Understand how climate change will make hundreds of millions migrate. Figure out something practical to do about it. Practice scales before playing partitas.
So every section, every book does end with a poem, and the final poem comes at the end of this section, the Book of Things I Need to Remember. There's one called Octopus and Me. It's a poem from bed, if you could read that.
Sure. Octopus and Me. The octopus is dreaming, twitches and rapid eye movements. What is the octopus dreaming of? Crabs and fish. What am I dreaming of? Oceans unharmed. Octopus and me, different pillows, same dream.
Thank you, James. Let's say there are closing images in the book as well. There's one I'm very fond of here. It's actually James sitting on an artistic slab looking out at mountains, taking things in. So this is the point where it's over to you. The questions that you have on anything, they could be on climate, on law, on poetry, on Zen, on the weather, whatever it is. Please, any questions you have? Yeah, Adrian.
I know you're a Zen priest. I know small parts of that journey, but
Yeah.
I'd love to know about how it originally came about and what event, perhaps there was a single event or multiple, took you to the beginning of that journey, and then, perhaps if we have time, what took you to live in a monastery for what sounded like a very long time.
Okay, what triggered your becoming a Zen priest and your first entry into Zen as well?
Yeah, well, Adrian's question included, was there an event? And there was actually an event. So when I was 33 or so years old, I was already an environmental lawyer. And I'd studied philosophy and thought I would find the meaning of life. I had a long-term relationship and thought I'd have the meaning of life. Neither of those worked out very well. I then was an environmental lawyer, winning all kinds of cases. I thought that would show me the meaning of life. It was good, but it didn't show me the meaning of life. And 3:30 one morning, I found myself completely sober, standing in my bathroom, looking at the mirror, and repeating to myself, I'm James Thornton, I'm 33, and I'm an environmental lawyer. I'm James Thornton, I'm 33, and I'm an environmental lawyer. As if I was reciting my name, rank, and serial number. And the thought that occurred to me was, wow, this guy is having a mental breakdown. This is genuinely interesting. So what is this like? And I thought, okay, now what can I do for this poor guy? You know, and I tried everything, as I was just saying, you know, and I tried Catholicism for many years before that. That's a long story. And I had known that in Zen, there's the claim that there is a methodology. And by this point, I was a very skeptical guy. So there's a repeatable methodology for discovering oneself, and that it was a self-discovery, and that it was essentially a science experiment, that you would do it and it would produce results. And it had produced results for a very long time. And because it was testable, I thought I can trust this. So I got some books I read. I bought a cushion, meditated in my room, started loving it. And then went to California and met my Izumi Roshi. And I called up and I said, I want to do a session. And the woman on the phone said, have you ever done a session before? And I said, no, of course not, I'm just starting. And she said, well, you know, it's pretty serious. 7 days of 9:30 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night meditating. You know, beginners don't do that. And I said, I will. You know. So I did, and I loved that. And then up in the mountains, around 4:30 in the morning, I was called into an interview, one-on-one with the teacher, as one does. So he's kneeling there, and you kneel and go up. And the tradition is you say what your practice is, what your name and your practice. So I said my name, and I said my practice is, who am I? Because I had assigned myself to study the question, who am I? What else would you do? So I said my practice is, who am I? And he said, who gave you this practice? And I said, I did. And he said, oh. And then he said, tell me about yourself. So I said, well, you know, I live in LA and blah, blah, blah. And he said, tell me about your family. And I said, well, my parents are still alive. Everything is okay. And he said, you have no family of your own? And I said, no, I'm gay. And I knew I was going to test him out on this, because if he was hypocritical, I was prepared to spit in his eye and walk out. And I later on realized that this was a very good Zen attitude. You know? So happily I didn't have to do that. He said, after this retreat, you have time to go back to the city center? And I said, sure, why not? You know, and he said, there is a monk there that I think you might enjoy meeting very much. And I thought, okay, first encounter with a Zen master, and he turns out to be a Jewish grandmother. I can get into this thing. And then it just went from there. For the rest of the time he was alive, 10 years, and I was living in LA and working on environmental law, I had 5 weeks of holiday a year. And so I did 5 week-long sessions. So very intensive. You know, and that's how I got in. You know, that's the story of beginnings.
Thank you.
It was so lovely to hear you, James, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I believe quite strongly in intuition, and I've always felt that you're so connected to your intuition, and I really enjoyed that about you and Martin. And I'm just sitting in this room looking at all these witchcraft and secrets and fantasies and everything. Yeah. And from what I know of you, you're obviously incredibly capable. I mean, you're softly spoken. Told me many times about your encounters with the Chinese government and winning cases against the UK government. And I'm very involved with young people. You know, I have 3 young children, teenagers, and something just hit me as you were talking which is not about your past, it's maybe about your future. I was thinking was yeah, I think when you also just when you finished on, you said AI is going to mean people don't have jobs anymore. And what came to me looking at all these things is, do you think there's a space in your future to set up? Because what I witnessed, there's a mental health crisis among young people, and it starts very young, at like 6. The anxiety levels of children is through the roof. There are not enough therapists. No one understands what's going on. Schools are totally unable to cope. Part of it is, we're becoming more aware, and ADHD and autism, all these things are being diagnosed. But there is, besides that, an existential crisis among the young. And I wondered, it feels like there's a space for people like you to create some kind of education program where meaning and purpose can be reinstalled into their life in terms of them understanding that they can take action, have a meaning, sort of help the planet, but maybe not in a full-time role, just in a sort of belonging to something that, I don't know, it feels like there's a space in education in the next chapter.
So this is a question that's actually drawn from what James has been saying and from this wonderful collection of books that are around here that creates that space for asking questions. It's from the question of Annabelle has this great belief in intuition. She's asking you about your future, tying in with her own sort of concerns for the young, who she sees as being incredibly anxious at the moment, and could do with some program to help them out of that. And I know you said earlier that anxiety is quite understandable. It's a rational approach, and I know you actually care. You actually delivered a young people's charter some time ago. Maybe talk about that, and maybe whether Annabelle's question about is that part of your future?
Not just in terms of like how to manage their anxiety, but how to give them purpose.
Yeah.
How to find purpose.
Almost like warriors for the planet.
Sure.
Alongside whatever other study or education they're doing. So.
Well, I like this the question, and the phrase "warriors for the planet."
That's good.
Is I think we need to brand that. Warriorsfortheplanet.org is a very good idea. Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I don't have an answer to it. Now that I'm working half-time at ClientEarth, I'm exploring what is next, and some version of what you're talking about has been very much appealing to me. So I worked with the ClientEarth team in LA when I was there recently about these issues, and they were very responsive. And a number of times when I've given talks, not to very young, but to older young people, like at Oxford, in one case, I gave a talk to a whole bunch of students, and then 2 years later found a Chinese woman who'd been there. I was working in my office in Beijing, and she said, the reason I'm here is because I heard you talk, and I decided to give my life to environmental law. So there is a function that I see there, in which sharing enthusiasm and possibility can help people believe in their own aptitude and their own ability to do stuff, and that needs to be nurtured. It was nurtured in me in a variety of ways, and I'm in a way searching for how to do that in the right way.
And I think young people need people. Like my daughter's really inspired by Greta Thunberg. They need these icons of people that are doing something and aren't just sitting there on their phone in apathy, kind of overwhelmed. And I think there's a big space emerging, a big space for that, like a vacuum.
Yeah, well, this is a beautiful question. So let's keep talking about that. Yeah.
More questions? Christine at the back.
Thank you so much, and I cannot wait to read the book. I'm so happy it exists. I have a question that's very personal, which is at the moment in my garden, which I love, and I share all your thoughts on relationship with nature and everything else. I have an ant infestation. So nature is amazing. And I'm trying to appreciate it and live with it, but I feel we're at odds. And I think that you can take that to a bigger level with a lot of the changing climate and things that are happening, and whether it's a hurricane that's going to tear down your house. And I was wondering if you'd had any thoughts on how you reconcile that space.
So how do you sort of reconcile the space when you're loving your garden and you admire ants, but you don't want the ant infestation? And you like weather, but you don't want the hurricane coming to sort of knock you out. How do you reconcile, your position as trying to be part of the world, but this place where the world sometimes seems to be against the things you want?
Oh, sure. You don't have to be passive. It isn't like, oh, come and get me. If I get bitten by a mosquito, I'll slap it if I can. There's a section in the book which studies the directions of a 13th century master who said, merge your mind with cosmic space and then integrate with all things. And I thought, well, that's a beautiful set of directions. What does it actually mean for me? So I went through a whole series of things. And the last one was when the fly walks on my face. So this is the merge with cosmic space part. When the fly walks on my face, that's just what it does. Now to come to the integrate part. Swat the fly. So now when it comes to ants, so we have a little conservatory, and out of the ground every year, religiously, boil about 2,000 female ants. So we celebrate it every year and open the windows and wish them well. And it's really fascinating. And then I figured out what species they were, about their life, and they amaze me. Now, are they like, they're not eating your garden, so.
Well, this goes beyond the sort of practicalities of that, but it's the relationship of feeling part of nature.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm like, well, they're apex predators in nature, and in this case, I am now an apex predator because I feel they have taken over my space and are, so it's a mindset, and I think as nature becomes more violent, or in cases where it can become more violent, it's just something that I find difficult to reconcile because I'm so used to being kumbaya about it all.
Yeah. Well, we certainly, are not going to just sit there when the hurricane comes, right? You're going to try and get somewhere else. So, yeah. With ants, keep going.
Well, humanity is the apex predator, and we're not able.
Yeah.
We don't contain and control it very much. So how can we learn to contain our own apex predatorness? Yeah.
Well, the same way you learn to do anything, which is to watch yourself and watch it arise, and ask what you want to do about it. Yeah.
More questions? I'd like you to tell us something about your twin sisters, which are mentioned in the book. You'll read about it in the book. There's different chapters about the twin sisters. But could you just lead people into that? Because this book stemmed out of 20 years of James fighting the fight, and then, as you said, bottling up anxiety, and then needing to go fragile and needing to just go quietly into nature to sort of understand where you'd reach to and where you need to come through, and then you realize that your life was accompanied by twin sisters.
Yeah. So this was part of the depth experience of looking into my own anxiety and trying to understand it and work with it. And we're creatures of story, right? I often think that Aristotle got it wrong when he said mankind, one would say these days, is the rational animal. In fact, we're storytelling animals, I think, with some reason over here. And so I use stories about my own inner life sometimes to understand them better. So here we were studying, here we were studying this, and I was sitting there or lying there thinking, how does this anxiety work out? What forms does it take? And I realized that there was a very strong sense of duty. I just have a very strong sense of duty. You see a problem and you need to solve it and you feel compelled. to solve it. For me, it's the planet's situation and people's situation. So duty, and then anxiety. I was laying anxiety up for the first time. And as I looked into it, these were my constant companions. And I had grown up with them. And I realized they were my twin sisters. They weren't different from me. They were part of my family. You know, anxiety was part of my family, and duty was part of my family. I knew them really, really well, and they traveled with me. And then at the end of that essay, it's maybe the longest essay, where I explore their nature and how they were always with me. The last sentence goes something like, now that I've seen this, I'm going to invite Joy in. She is a more distant relative, but she's always very pleased to hear from me. Good, really tough questions.
Yeah, go on, throw one at him.
As long as it's not about football.
Yeah. Oh, Sarah, at the back.
Thank you. Wonderful. I'm sorry that I missed the first part, but really wonderful. Today was so much that we hear into it. I wondered about your Auntie Joy, and I wondered whether you could say a bit more about inviting the distant relative Joy in, and how I really resonate with your twin sisters, and I wondered how we might do that, how you did that, so we could learn something from your method. I wonder if you've got to know her a bit more from inviting her in, and how that relationship is developing.
Sure.
So could you say something a little more about the inviting Joy in? Did she come? Are you enjoying life together? Did she stick around, or is duty and anxiety chucked back out the door? How's Joy doing in your life?
Well, she drops around from time to time, unexpectedly for a cup of tea. And I did find that actually inviting Joy in was a good practice, you know, because if you're always focused on being very serious and doing things, or you're very focused on taking care of my own problems, there's not much space for joy, you know. But joy is part of our natural disposition, and it offers us very good guidance about where we want to be going. Joy is a very good guidepost for where to spend more time. You know, anxiety, maybe not. Joy, maybe so. And you can't compel joy to attend, I discovered. But it's more like, you know, you can clear the dance floor and tune the instruments and offer a celebration. And then, yes, and of course, being in nature does this very, very well. I mean, it often triggers joy. If you, we were in South Africa and we were walking through the oldest rainforest at the very tip of the country, and we came to a place on the path where we were facing a branch. Suddenly on the branch, a little gray bird. I love birds, but this wasn't a very showy bird. It was a little gray bird. It turned out to be a type of flycatcher. And it perched there as close to me as I am to you. Very unusual for a bird. And then went about its business of flying off, catching an insect, coming back. Flying off, catching an insect, coming back. And we watched it for about a half hour. And it was imperturbable in its activity and participating in that way, in that empathic way, was absolutely something that brought joy. And does every time I think about her. Her the bird, as well as her joy.
James is a violinist as well. It takes me back to that last line in the to-do list piece. Practice scales before playing partitas. Yeah. It's like let duty take hold, practice your scales, and then have fun with the partitas.
Yep.
But I'd like to sort of close this piece with you reading a whole list of your own questions. This is the poem that closes the book of questions. It's called Does Happiness Depend?
Does happiness depend? Where does beauty go when it vanishes? Why do people die when they are killed? Why can't we touch thoughts? Where does music come from? Will the first artificial general intelligence love us back? Why are we awake? Where did all the antimatter go? Does happiness depend on knowing?
Well, thank you, James.